Hey, I'm V and welcome to VAEXPERIENCE, and today I want to share with you a simple recipe to make your ideations better. Doesn't matter who you are, you could be product designer, you could be a consultant, you could be a product manager. It's like applicable to any tech innovation. And the toolkit, what I'm going to share with you, I learned in my consulting days, but I also evolved as I developed my UX skills throughout the years. And whilst you could approach ideations in a lot of different ways, this way it kind of makes you or forces you to think a bit bigger than you usually would. An approach is very simple. Your ideations, at least mentally, should be divided into 3 buckets. And each of the buckets, once it overflows, feeds into a smaller bucket, until you arrive at something tangible. So imagine, let's say, if you are there to design a new experience for, I don't know, something random. From UX perspective, keeping in mind usability and maybe some measures from product perspective, like efficiency gains or interaction to be better or some sort of improvements in usability so that people can achieve their task better. You could kind of improve and tweak experiences and innovate gradually, but this is quite small, especially in today's world where you have emerging tech and AI and things of that nature. So you must think bigger, and how you do so is really project forward, and that then lands you in that first bucket, which is basically, how could this experience look like with all the stuff you know and the stuff you don't know, simply diverging on a lot of different signals and overlapping a lot of different ideas, and figuring out how this idea could look like in, let's say, the next decade, maybe 5 years. And in the practical terms, you might get a client, maybe you're gonna do workshop series with your team, and basically imagining and calling out how might we improve these specific bits, maybe feature buckets or so forth, or maybe problems we have currently, or maybe this is what research states which could be improved, and also both signal from emerging tech world, and kind of just simply projecting with absolutely no limits, designing it that way, designing all those different ideas and coming up with this experience. And granted, the output of the actual workshops could be storyboards, let's say, but storyboards from the actual user or customer perspective. So they're not yet mock-ups. You could mock something up, but granted, they're going to be very fuzzy, and as they should. Now, this is where a lot of the people, when they start ideating, they use that as a, vision setting or vision type of approach. But what I found from the field and working with a lot of designers, they're still not aiming that high. So the first and most important bucket is to actually understand what is vision and what is not. And if it's true vision, if it's true 10 or 5 years or whatever is that mark experience should look like, you kind of have to aim for the moonshot. And if we go back to the Formula 1 driver experiences, maybe imagining what that could look like with no driver. Maybe it's robotic races. Maybe it's some other type of sports experiences which humans are through brain neural interfaces interacting with a car instead of sacrificing their safety, if that's an issue. So allowing the team and yourself to basically diverge with no limits whatsoever and imagining that far future. And what this does, if you can kind of outline this first bucket, it allows you to basically project into the desirable future, because if you can set and think about something into the future, it's more likely you're gonna land close enough. You might not land, totally there, which you set out to do, but you're gonna land at least in the same kind of ballpark or in the same fuzzy territory. Now, the second bucket, and imagine you're maybe running these workshops, like series 1 is done where you outline with vision and long-term experiences. You can then go and narrow it down into a more realistic, or what I would call like ideal product experience state. Sometimes people, consultants, merge the two and just have future state or vision state, and then we go into a pragmatic, like the third bucket, but I don't want to immediately drop there. It's quite important to narrow down and slowly converge into that funnel until you arrive at something you can laser focus on. And so the second bucket is about ideal product experience. You take what you ideated on a vision, and within that vision bucket, and then roll back and say, if we want to get there, what would that experience look like in the next year or two? And you again ideate, but more specifically, and maybe your research now is starting to flow in. Maybe insights from other teams start to flow in. Maybe your how my tweets are gonna be much more directional or specific, and then you outline your product experience. And as you can see, between the third and second bucket, there is a big jump. But when people talk about vision, they kind of focus on second bucket. They don't think long-term enough and big enough. And that's super important. That's why I'm bringing it in. And once you define that second bucket, let's say, and the team is happy, the outputs could be mock-ups, but you outline your vision for the actual product end-to-end and how the key happy paths could look like for your user. Granted, you might be right enough. You probably are not, so you would want to test it, you would want to prototype it, you would want to exactly prove if you're in the right ballpark. And once you have enough evidence or enough buy-in, enough kind of traction with the teams or your stakeholders or even the business or your client, you can then go into more specific kind of immediate steps, the third bucket. And you can prioritize, and then you can go into flows and make your mock-ups happen. And as you can see, the funnel and the transition is gradual, but you start very broad, very vague, very futuristic, and then time yourself the last bits which you immediately can action. So your last bucket could be limited. Let's say, what can we deliver in the next quarter or half a year or a year? Depends how big the challenge is, of course. If you want to redesign a world or make something like self-driving cars or flying cars, it could be all over a place, and you need to then structure your flow. So next time, if you're kind of thinking, oh, should I maybe storyboard that new experience? Think more holistically, just zoom out a bit, become a bit more strategic UX designer, and think, okay, like how long should we think about? How fuzzy or uncertain can we make things? Again, from systemic perspective, or how we change the systems or services en masse as a whole, from customer experience perspective, you don't just zoom in into a specific UX of a product and then change that product. Of course, in the end you will, but hold off for a bit. Try to zoom out just a little bit, outline experience on a bigger terms, and then specify. Because you're gonna also, from idealistic perspective, gonna arrive at better conclusions, because we're not just gonna be narrow focused, or you're not just gonna enhance one touch point, but in reality, it's not that impactful, or it's not that really meaningful, because it's so small within this bigger system, which you need to consider and address. Using these three buckets around so many different projects as an IC back in the day, and as well as a manager, influencing how my teams would approach the ideations, or how they would try to diverge with the teams meaningfully, and let also stakeholder know what's happening. Because, sometimes you're gonna jump on ideation workshop and you're gonna struggle to explain, because we might give you principle level ideas, or we might give you very specific ideas like feature requests. So you can then basically guide them and say, hey, we're not just yet talking about granular stuff. Now we're talking about experience as it would look like in the next decade. So let's take off our hats and let's kind of explore it in a way and converge on a lot of different things. And the magic happens there, because then it's easier for people to kind of step back from their day-to-day scenarios and think a bit more holistically. That way, innovation is still such a big selling point for a lot of consultancies. Doesn't matter if it's in-house of UX team of one, or maybe it's some sort of innovation consultancy like IDEO doing their design thinking. They start quite broad, and you should too, because it's quite effective. And so that's a quick overview. Use this framework or this recipe to structure your ideations, and you're certainly gonna arrive at better conclusions, or solutions which are not just gonna be, let's just add another feature here and there. Features don't really matter. The UX is about the actual effect. And if you take sustainability, let's say, as a goal, or making everything sustainable as a principle, then you have no other choice but always keep zooming out and think way ahead, and then walk backwards in these increments. In 3 buckets, 6 buckets, you name it, it doesn't matter. But as long as you project way in advance and then walk to medium term and then immediate term, you should be good. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. And on that note, I'll see you next time.